All right. Welcome to day 2 of your note set. So, yesterday we talked about how the colonists had won the French and Indian War, and then they had great expectations put on them by the British. So, to remind ourselves, we had a couple terms yesterday with the Proclamation of 1763. Remember, the root word of proclamation is to proclaim. So in this case, they proclaimed that the colonists who worked so hard in the French and Indian War did not get to go across the Appalachian mountain chain. Bummer. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is they slapped the Sugar Act down on them. They told them that they would have to pay extra or a tax on their sugar, which was what they did because they loved their tea, and on their molasses, in their molasses as well. So they had to pay tax on that. And also the Quartering Act, because they needed to enforce the proclamation line. So the colonists had to do room and board for these adult male soldiers who came in to protect that line. Don't forget Pontiac's War, really, that kind of started it all off too, but that, as we said, was kind of the last gasp for the Native Americans for a while, at least to try and keep the colonists, the British, out of what would be their territory to the west. So that gets us to today. So very fitting that on a day, election day, they, of course, it's when I'm recording this, but not tomorrow, which is Wednesday. But anyways, I digress. That on that day of election day, we're talking about citizen protests. So here we go. So we're talking about citizen protests here, and it comes a time for when, sorry, that's something on my finger. Not that I want to eat it, but sorry, it's distracting me. Anyways, so yeah, they did not like what was going on with the Quartering Act, with Sugaring Act, and with the Proclamation of 1763. So we're going to talk about how they're going to protest, but before we even get to that, we have another act called the Stamp Act, which is going to come into play here, and this is exactly like it sounds. So if you really had to think about what the Sugar Act was all about, well, you might have to do the same thing here for the Stamp Act. Okay, not so much. I like this little meme. This works really well. So anyways, it's passed in 1765. So, you know, all the years after the French and Indian War, all this stuff's coming into play. So like I said, big snowball effect on those colonists that you literally had to put a stamp on different products. Products that included anything for documents, any kind of newspaper. So if you were into law or if you were into the media or newspapers back at the time period, you had to put this tax or the stamp that you saw right here on pretty much any product. Yeah, even playing cards. That's a playing card, believe it or not. So you're now getting taxed for your sugar. You're getting taxed for your stamps. You can't cross the line and expand to the west. And you have to put up room and board for British soldiers. So you can kind of see the writing on the wall at how the colonists are going to get upset because they were supposed to have prospered after this French and Indian War, but unfortunately the British just keep stacking more and more stuff on top of them. So this is the beginning of when the colonists protest. One of the reasons why I had you guys do the protest songs, because I want you to see that there are various ways in which people can protest things that they don't like. And it can be by way of song. It can be simple. It can be complex. It can be violent, it can be nonviolent, but there are a plethora of ways that you can still do these things today, but I don't know, we kind of prefer to stand outside, cause havoc at times, when maybe we need to go back to some of the more simpler ways. So I'll give you some examples of this, and you can see here in this first one, this is a protest of probably a British tax collector that they strung him up by his trousers, his pantaloons, whatever, but they had strung him up high. Or in this case, just kind of a gathering of people to come out and speak their voice. And notice it's all walks of life. It's rich, it's poor, it's black, it's white, it's men, it's women in this picture. So I think that's a good representation of the people who were protesting at that time period, because all of these things really hit pretty much everybody. So you even get people to start speaking up. And this is where you're literally sticking your neck out, because as the saying is, sticking your neck out, that means someone can put a noose on it, someone can put it in the guillotine, whatever. But one of the names that's famous at this time period is a guy who's a great orator, which means he spoke very well with the name, with the word orator. Uh, it is Patrick Henry. You might recognize Patrick Henry around because you're like, oh, there's a Patrick Henry High School. And yep, that's named in his honor. And he said, if this be treason, make the most of it, which is what the colonists were being referred to as traitors because of their actions of protesting against the royalty, the crown. And so being called traitors, he's saying, well, all right, well, if this is treason, which means to go against your country, then let's make the most of it because we're trying to make things for the better. So you kind of see this even in modern times where people are protesting this or that, and then people are like saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that type of thing. But it goes back in our history to the 1700s. So we're going to keep on keeping on with protesting if we see that something is actually wrong. And now here's where Patrick Henry kind of gets himself in trouble, is that he declares that King George might meet the fate of Julius Caesar. Now that only works if you know what happened to Julius Caesar. So I remember that from last year. Well, he was stabbed in the back by his own Senate, by his own people who thought that he was going to declare himself king and really rule over things and cause problems. And so his best friends ended up stabbing him in the back quite literally. And so Patrick Henry says, well, if that's the case, he might meet the fate of Julius Caesar. Now those are pretty strong words, and those are ones that could get Patrick Henry in some trouble. So the first way of protest is having a voice, is speaking up in some fashion, in some regard. The second kind that we'll talk about is a boycott, which is pretty simple because, well, look at this picture here that I have. A boycott means that you are not buying a product. So I have some different versions of some boycotts up here historically. Anybody know what this one is by chance? Give me a second to think about it. Look at the people involved. Look at what they're doing. Anybody? Okay, these are the bus boycotts back in the 1960s, especially in Selma, Alabama and other places, because they were protesting their right to sit in the front of the bus and not have to give up their seat. So basically fighting for equal rights. And you're like, well, wait a second. Well, how does that work? How does not buying a product or using a service create change? Well, it's pretty simple. You're hitting them in the pocketbook. This is an economic protest. Now, it doesn't take a day. It might take months. It might take weeks in order for them to, the group, in this case, the bus lines or whoever, to back down to appease their customers, because at the time period, African Americans made up the majority of the bus riders at the time period. So if they're now all carpooling, riding their bikes, walking to these places, then the bus lines end up losing their money. And so in some cases, economic protests can end up changing things for the best for society. Second picture here, you get an idea of what this is. Just look at what are on the gentleman's shoulders there, or sleeves. This is Nazi boycott. Now, this is a Nazi boycott, kind of a forced boycott that's a little bit different, whereas they told people that they were not to go into Jewish shops and buy their products. So that's 1940s. And then the last one, I just found this one online. Not that it's a big thing, but you can just, two people can make a protest. One person can make a protest. It doesn't mean that it's going to, change the world. But I can remember when people were protesting KFC, not because of their delicious food, but instead because of their treatment. You can see the little picture down here that they're protesting the treatment of the animals at the time period. So again, it can be major, it can be small, but protest means just not buying products. So that's what it is. Don't buy that product, hit them in the pocketbook, and maybe they'll make some social changes. Now, another protest that you see here, this is a little bit different. This one's a little more, we'll say, physical or violent, in which they're taking, I believe, a tax collector. I'm trying to read the thing there. And have the Liberty Tree back here, and then you can see the noose off to the side. If you look at the background, you can see people dumping tea. But this is them tarring and feathering a British official, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Literally pouring tar on them and then throwing chicken feathers on them, and then pouring hot tea down this person's throat. We like to call that assault and battery in modern times, so I would not recommend that fashion of protesting. The other type is a petition. So if it's not done orally, it might be done written. And this is the case where people write out their responses, or what we call their grievances, towards the government or a person. And then you get a petition. You get these names written down of all these people who back it up. This one's good. I've seen this one done before, but the problem is a lot of people aren't brave enough always to put their name on a sheet of paper that especially lists grievances that they might have against another place. So petition. And I've seen this one in school where kids have asked for better food in the cafeteria, or having certain rights, and have written something up nicely, and then people sign off on it. And if it's only like 5 people signing it, probably not gonna make a difference, but the more the merrier on these types of things. And we actually have some petitions that we will send to the King of England. So in this case, that is one thing that they do, is they, besides refusing to buy the product, they write petitions, and they end up sending them all the way to England, to the king, and said, no more taxes. We just have gotten hit so hard. Can you please stop taxing us? And so they say, we're going to pull the stamp back, but they passed something called the Declaratory Act. Now, the Declaratory Act is pretty simple in that it doesn't really put a tax on anything. It is simply playing on the root word of declaratory, which is, anybody? Not dec, not clare, but declare. What does it mean? Think about what it means to declare something. To declare something means to state it loudly and abruptly and clearly for everybody. Like, I love cheeseburgers. I don't know why I came up with that. I don't really love cheeseburgers, but to just say something loudly and passionately and factually. And in this case, all it was England saying, hey, we have the right to control you guys. And if we're going to pass anything, then you're going to have to abide by that. So it's interesting that they did this because, again, it wasn't anything that really changed anything, but they're saying to the colonists, fine, we're listening, we're going to pull these things back, but just remember, we are in charge. And that's all the Declaratory Act actually was. So the protesters, and we'll talk about some of these and the types of protests. So this one is actually a historic protest, which was done in China. I'm thrown off by a little bit. I do believe China. And where they had martial law at one point in one of their cities. It was a student protest, I think Beijing. And these students were protesting, and so they called martial law and said there's a curfew and you're not to be out in the streets. Well, these all big tanks are rolling around the streets, and there's a famous picture, which is the one I have here, of this gentleman right there who stands in front of all the tanks and stops them. So they stop rolling. So it's a little bit of a tense moment because big tank, weighing tons, going to roll over and smash this little guy. But it also shows the power of, one individual to make a difference here. And the old "a picture's worth 1,000 words," and it is. And so this is his own little protest. He's standing in front of those tanks, risking his own life. And then if you watch the video, he kind of just keeps on moving his way. But for a moment in time, he was able to stop those tanks. This next one is from the 1960s. This is where a lot of your colleges and universities had protests by students, and the National Guard might come out to stop these protests. And instead of fighting in violence, what's he doing? He's dropping some flowers in there. So very interesting kind of protest. Brave too, because they got little bayonets at the end of them. And then here's one that I've seen before. And if you go to DC, if we can get there at some point, this is one that you might see around there. It's where people who are wearing faceless masks and walking around, and these are faceless victims, civilians who perhaps were killed during war or a battle, or their village had been bombed mistakenly, and they've got the names of some of those victims on there. So protests can come again in a variety of fashions. Fashions. Anyways, so at this point, not only does Britain pass, as I said, the Declaratory Act, but they also passed the Townshend Act. So this video, again, you can click on it, or I'll drop it into the Google Drive. This one you can't actually click on this. If you're trying to click it, it doesn't work that way. But I'll drop it in there. But it's a nice little 2 or 3 minute section from John Green that kind of explains the Townshend Act as it comes next. And there's another picture there of, it says a new method of macaroni making. Not quite, it's more tarring and feathering. But anyways, the Townshend Act comes in and says, fine, we're going to take care of some of these taxes. We're going to get some more going. We're going to clean things up. but said no taxing of things within the colonies, only those things that are brought in. So this is, an import tax. You were importing or bringing things into your colony. So that gets passed in there. And Britain also passes what's called the writs of assistance. Now, this seems weird. It's a weird phrase, but this is also one of the bigger deals for the colonists. Whereas they said the Quartering Act really is getting on us personally, and we're having to deal with these guys who are coming into our houses and eating our food. It's kind of like Goldilocks and Three Bears. But this is going to be even worse. It passed this thing called the writs of assistance that says, and allow for British officials to make searches at any time on any place. So if you weren't liked by the British, you can imagine that they're going to come knocking in your door at some point and come look at your house. And you're like, well, I don't have anything to hide. It's not a problem. That's not really what it's about. It's about private property, something that we have talked about before. And so when we formed the Constitution and created the amendments, some of the very first things that come into your first 10 amendments are, your right to not have troops quartered in your houses, and then this one, which is about search warrants and seizures and things like that, which we hold true today. And no one wants anybody coming into their house for any reason if they're not asked to do so. So imagine me just stomping through your house and looking through your stuff with no purpose whatsoever, other than I say, well, I think you're guilty of something. Yeah, that kind of stinks. But that's what the British do to the colonists. And so again, the colonists come right back at it and they protest again, which makes sense. You got rid of these things we were protesting against, and you drop more dumb stuff on top of us. Yeah, no kidding, we're going to protest and we're going to boycott your stuff. And so they do that one more time here, which leads to, our last thing for today is the Boston Massacre. Clearly, based on the picture here, you can see what it's about, and the fact that it's got the word massacre in it, and most people would know that that means it's like a lot of people being killed at one time. Things are getting worse. You can drop one thing on me, and I'm not going to necessarily be upset with it. Excuse me. I'm not going to necessarily be upset with it. But at the same time, if you keep doing these things, it's going to get progressively worse. So that's what happens here, is these things start small scale and then they get big scale, and it's hard to scale it back once you cross that line. So we're not violent yet, but we're getting there to this point. So that's going to be very problematic, obviously, for the colonists, because you can't go back once you cross that line, like I said. So the Boston Massacre, again, John Green video down here, if you want to watch that. And right, yeah, there we go. Okay, my thing's not working. But anyways, so watch that John Green video on the side. Talks about the Boston Massacre, just a little more detail than I might give it. But here's the representation of this picture right here. You see the close quarters, not necessarily what happened, but basically the British firing on some colonists. So here's where it starts. That's March 5th, 1770. So, several hundred years ago. England decides we're going to remove all the taxes, forget everything, except for that on tea. They're really solid on this tea thing, and that's going to come back to bite them in a little bit in the next set of notes tomorrow. So they remove all the taxes but those that are on the tea. And so the colonists are like, okay, but we still love our tea and we don't want to be taxed a whole bunch. But England still wanted to flex their muscle and show them that they had the right to tax the colonists, whether they liked it or not. And that goes all the way back to that Declaratory Act that I mentioned already. So to set it up, at Boston Harbor, or Boston Port, you have a group of workers and sailors who are there working. And that's where your tea and such all come in. And it's a cold wintry day, pre-spring-ish. And what the workers and the sailors start doing is they see a little group of British soldiers nearby and they start taunting them. They start calling them names, singing songs at them. And then it gets to be a snowball fight. And then, not necessarily between the two groups, but the colonists end up rolling up snowballs and they're throwing this stuff at the British soldiers. And I mean, who knows what was in the, it could have been, if you're throwing a snowball at me, I don't know that I'm going to want to punch you, but if you're throwing a snowball at me with rocks or sticks or small animals inside, then we're probably going to fight at some point. And so that's what happens here is they're taunting these soldiers and as I said, threw rocks and snowballs at them. And in the end, the soldiers, feeling that they needed to protect themselves, fired back on this group of people. And they ended up killing 5. And Crispus Attucks was your first killed, and he was an African American. I believe he was a worker. And so I think that's significant too, because like I said at the beginning of this, it's really people of all walks of life who were involved with this at the time. And so again, I say look at it from 2 perspectives. Look at it from the side of the colonists. Of course, Britain's doing a lot of things to you. You don't like any of those things, so you're going to have to or want to protest in some fashion. But on the British side of things, you're a soldier and somebody's throwing things at you. Do you have that right to defend yourself? I suppose so, but do you defend yourself this violently? Now, of course, they don't have stun guns at the time period. They didn't have nets or anything like that. All they had was their single-shot rifles with typically a bayonet at the end of it. And what do? In some fashion, somebody's going to get hurt. And I can understand that the British were wanting to prove a point too, but also protect themselves. But, was it extreme on both sides? I think so. But when you're poking the bear, like the colonists were doing, at some point the bear is going to fight back as well. And so that is what happens. So here is a little thing at the time period, a little excerpt from the newspaper of those who, the CA is Crispus Attucks right there. And then you can actually go to Boston and see, it says the remains of those 5 gentlemen right there killed in the Boston Massacre. And then someone else who died, looks like a little bit beforehand. It says the innocent first victim of the struggles between the colonists and the crown, which would be Britain. So at this point, we have a quick reaction to this. We have to figure out what we're going to do. You have these people obviously are killed, and I'm going to jump ahead real quick because I want to make sure I remember where I stopped. Okay, you just got 3 points. Yeah, some of you guys are just like, I'm just going to work ahead. So anyways, there we go. So at this point, we have to start getting information out to people. And so that's what this next thing is. And I'm going to take my picture off the middle of it there. There we go. It's called the Committees of Correspondence. Committees of Correspondence is exactly what it sounds like. If you think of a committee is a group of people who do something, and to correspond with somebody means to write to them. Back in the old day, not like telephone or text messaging. I guess text messaging would count, but back at the time period, it's writing stuff down. So we need to get the word out. There's no social media or anything at the time period where you can be influencers and all put out to all your fans who will let the rest of the world know what's going on. So the job of these people is to send out news to the rest of the colonies and to tell them exactly what's going on. It's created by a guy named Sam Adams. I know, Sam Adams, right? This guy, or probably from that. Yes, Samuel Adams, the Boston logger, is named in his honor. I don't know if he did it or not, but I guess he liked his loggers. Created by Sam Adams, who was a cousin of John Adams, who will be very famous very shortly. But Sam Adams created this with the purpose of telling people what's going on. And he wanted to pass out pamphlets and letters in order to inform people. Because that's one of our struggles that we have even today is you say, well, what's your opinion on this? And you go, well, I don't even know what it's about. So unless you really tell people the facts and the information, they can't have an informed opinion. So the committees of correspondence are really important to get that word out to everybody else all around, not just like in Boston, but to everybody and say, hey, here's what's going on in Boston, and here's what we need to fix. So it told the colonists of the unpopular acts of Britain. That's the purpose of the committees of correspondence. Now, it doesn't mean we're done yet. There's still going to be a further reaction to this Boston Massacre, and it's going to go much further. So we'll be establishing some things tomorrow and also making things a little more worse for wear between the colonists and the British. But look at how quickly it's going. We just won the French and Indian War. We beat Pontiac, and now within 10 short years, and less than that, we're fighting amongst ourselves. Because the crown is not giving as much as the colonists think they should, and the colonists aren't doing as much as the crown thinks that they should. So there's your set of notes for today. Peace out. Cam says hi. He's still sitting back in his perch. You can see him lurking over my shoulder. Kind of creepy, but that's okay. But anyways, get your notes done. Start studying for your states and capitals. I don't know when we're going to take it, but we're going to at some point. So you do not get escape from that one. Thus says the crown. All right. Have a good day.